Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, excuse me. Thank you for joining our webinar today with a Design Power Hour on triggers and content. Let's see, I'm going to share my screen. Okay. The webinar has been approved for 1 hour of CTS and CTSD today. Please allow 5 to 7 business days for those credits to appear on your transcript. If you have any questions, feel free to email webinars@avixa.org and we will get you taken care of. Today's webinar will be approximately 45 to 60 minutes in length. Audience questions will be addressed by the panel during the webinar as well as at the conclusion of the webinar. Please enter your questions into the Q&A box that can be found at the bottom of your screen. Please do not enter your questions into the chat box because those questions tend to get lost. If you missed one of the other Design Power Hours, please visit avixa.org/training section, and all of the recorded webinars will be listed on there. Today's webinar will be recorded and available at the same link in 5 business days. Unfortunately, no RUs are available for watching the webinar, but there is great information on there, so please take advantage of that. This is, let's see, this is the wrong screen share. So hang on just one second. Here we go. Sorry about that, you guys. So today's panel is going to be Ryan Cohoy, Chief Revenue Officer within Realty, Tober Mann, EVP of 22 Miles, Tim Vance, CEO of Datacall Technologies, and Jeffrey Weitzman from Navori will be joining us on the panel today. Ryan, I'm going to turn it over to you. And if you guys need any questions or have anything, just holler. I'll be here to support. Thanks so much.
Great, thanks. I'm going to just share my screen here real quick. Okay, as Lauren said, my name's Ryan Cohoy within Reality. I'm part of the board for the Digital Signage Federation, and I'm active with the Education Committee. I'll act as the moderator for today's conversation. My company in Reality works with a range of sensors from Wi-Fi to cameras to radar to help measure shopper engagement in stores. So this topic's one that I find very exciting and timely. And joining me, Lauren already introduced the 3 panelists that we've got. I'll have each of these 3 gentlemen introduce themselves and their companies in more detail here in just a few minutes. Just kind of set the stage. We expect things to last about an hour, and quick agenda, go through an overview for some context, then we'll get to know our panelists, and then we're going to jump into some topics that we all picked to start the conversation. But again, we do encourage questions, so look for that Q&A box. Anything you've got on your mind, throw your questions in there. We've got plenty of time to allow you to pick the brains of our panelists. And then we'll wrap everything up with the panelists each giving their key thoughts and takeaways. So again, as we proceed through this, please throw your questions in. As a DSF board member, I'd be remiss if I didn't put together kind of a short plug for our online education. We've developed about 40 online courses on a range of topics, and I believe all 3 of the panelists that we have here have helped create and contribute to some of these courses. So if you're a DSF member, you do get 1 license. Please take advantage of that. If you aren't a member, please consider joining. Cost is relatively inexpensive, $100 to $500 a year, depending on the type of company. So please check that out. So a little context for today's discussion. We've all heard the typical digital signage pitch that, getting the right message on the right screen at the right time. Today, what we want to talk about is how you can make your digital signage smarter, where getting that right message on the screen isn't a manual process, and where you can leverage content and triggers to automatically determine what should play. For example, by monitoring the weather, you can sell the right product. If it's raining, umbrellas; if it's hot, it's ice cream; if it's cold, it's hot chocolate, things like that. And while there's rules, the magic behind the scenes can be AI that's dynamically changing the hierarchy of importance. So, that could be a situation where weather's trumping a loop of content, like the example you see here. But then also, Once inventory maybe is depleted, that factor takes priority and the digital signage content can change to promote something else like raincoats or something that might be in stock. A lot of digital signage is underutilized because it's just playing a loop. It isn't aware of the changing conditions. And here's an example where a sign doesn't know a product is out of stock. By making your digital signage aware, leveraging triggers, and a lot of things we're going to talk about today, this is where you can increase sales to trigger content to play something more relevant. And triggering content can go beyond the weather and inventory. If you tie it in with things like point of sale, you can drive larger transactions by looking at complementary products and injecting the right ads into your messages. So, what we're going to focus on today is talking a lot about how digital signage is advancing and growing, how data and triggers can be used to make your content smarter. We're going to touch on a lot of different things, from camera vision analytics to Wi-Fi to beacons to Bluetooth, proximity sensors. Again, a lot of different things. We've got a great panel with a lot of experience to share all that. We're also going to talk a little bit about automated content feeds and how you can use this to make your displays fresh and engaging as well. So with that, that's a little bit of context. Before we jump into the topic, I do want to have the panel briefly introduce themselves. Today's conversation is going to be pretty general and education. We're not slanting it towards any specific vendors or products. But if you do want to engage with any of us that are on, I did put email addresses for each of the panelists up on the screen. Feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to answer your questions. So with that, Mr. Weitzman, I'll let you introduce yourself and Navori to start things off.
Thank you, Ryan. Quick introduction. I'm Jeffrey Weitzman. I work with Navori Labs. At our core, Navori is an engineering company. We develop software. We've been doing this since 1997, so about 20 plus years in the business. I myself have been with Navori for about 11, going on 12 years. So quite a bit of experience watching the industry evolve and seeing a lot of these technologies get implemented and learning, what works and what doesn't work. So I'm looking forward to sharing some of that today. The dominant focus of Navori up until now has really been digital signage. More recently, we've also started to get heavily into marketing analytics. And that's really because we believe that there's a big relationship between digital signage, making it smarter, and the types of data and how you feed data to that digital signage. So I think that that's very relevant today, and I'm excited to talk about it.
Great. Same to you, Mr. Mann, for you can introduce yourself in 22 miles.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Torman with, or Man, I guess depends on the day or how you want to say it. With 22 Miles, been with them since 2014. 22 Miles was founded as kind of a multi-touch wayfinding solution in 2007. Very much a startup mentality based in Silicon Valley. We just also moved to Atlanta area as well, just as of January. And we've kind of evolved into more of a digital signage platform with an emphasis on multi-touch, on video walls, and API integrations, which is kind of very fitting for what today's conversation is with triggering data and all of that kind of stuff. So we definitely work with just about any third-party data feed to really automate and create dynamic content solutions and experience centers. And I think since COVID, we've also pivoted more into visitor management, access control components, kind of what we call protection as a service suite, where we've leveraged existing components for reopening, for the digital transformation. And I think the API and triggering, which again, the conversation will be today, really solidified that flexibility. And so we're excited for the future, especially with how everyone is looking for the innovation to help kind of from a safety, agility, and business continuity perspective.
Excellent. And last but not least, Mr. Vance, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, guys. Happy to be here today. I'm Tim Vance, CEO and founder of Data Call Technologies. The company was founded in 2002, early part. We've been there, one of the pioneers in the aggregated dynamic content solution, news, sports, weather, traffic, a whole lot more, safety slides to traffic, of course, weather, from raw data to visualizations, playlist ready content. We've recently added Amber Alert feeds that could also trigger different things to happen. We've been your go-to, and there's other people out there doing it, but we're all happy to be here today, and I'm hoping to share anything I can with the group. That's about all I got. We're
Excellent.
here, wait and listen.
Excellent. Well, why don't we start it off with some of the questions that we put together as a group. Tim, I'll start with you. Your background with automated content. What are some of the benefits, use cases for live feeds, alerts, those types of things?
Probably one of the easiest ones to think of, you kind of mentioned earlier in the presentation, where we've used weather triggers to activate different sales. We had a client that integrated the weather feed into their POS that would check inventory levels of, I think it was a hot chocolate product. And when the temperature dropped so far, they popped that in to go. We did some work here a while back in the retail sector where they were merging sports scores and weather together to promote not only just the umbrella when it's raining, but if there was a specific team playing in that area, it was honed down by zip code, and they said, okay, team XYZ on that umbrella, there's a sale right now for anyone heading to the game. There's so many different ways that things can be triggered. We have like in our traffic feeds that can trigger different screens to play with different routes of a quicker way home. It's up to the imagination of your CMS providers. We have all the tools you need, all the formats of XML, JSON, RSS, of course. But I'm going to leave that to the rest of the guys here to talk about how they actually go about utilizing our data to make this stuff happen.
So Tomer, I'll throw the same question at you. What are your thoughts on automated content and some of the benefits and use cases out there on live feeds?
I think it's very relevant and prevalent nowadays. Kind of real-time information. I think for the last year we've seen all of this COVID-related safety and hygiene kind of infotainment type of scenarios, and all of that is really triggered in real time, right? The CDC were making changes every month, it seemed like, so that content was changing, but changing obviously the weather, as Tim alluded to, changing transit or commuter information. All of that can also be, I guess, windows or zones within a multi-window layout or a template. So there's all of these design layers that people can really be hands-off on, as long as you're integrating third-party data feeds, whether it's RSS, HTML, XML, CSV, SQL, LDAP, ICS, whatever data source is out there. It can auto-sync this information to really create relevant information, because otherwise your system just gets stagnant. So I think automating and triggering content is the most important part about digital signage. Otherwise, it's just get normal signage on the wall.
All makes sense. Jeffrey, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, both really good answers. So, I'll take a stab at it. I'll give a kind of two-part answer, kind of building on what Tim and Tomer mentioned. The building block of all of this is the data that you have. And if you think about it, there's really three pillars. There's what data do we have? And then there's what tools do I have to manage and ingest the data? And then finally, there's what content do I have to play that I want to have show on the screen based on what the data is telling me. So those are really the three things that come into play. And automation, that's all about automation is all about that. So obviously there's major benefits to that. The main claim would be that it's better because it's more real time. So the information that you're getting is going to be more relevant to the audience when they're looking at it. There's an understanding that it should lower total cost of ownership. So when you think of TCO, if there's less manipulation once something is set up and the content stays fresh with less intervention within the CMS, that's going to lead to a more efficient network and more scalability. So as you grow the number of screens, your cost of managing and maintaining a network is going to come down. We see examples of automation using this type of stuff, all over the place. We see it in programmatic advertising, that's automated content. We see it in suggestive selling, which we'll probably talk more a little bit later. And Ryan, you gave some good examples. Suggestive selling can come from various data sources like inventory or POS, or understanding patterns from previous purchases. So we'll talk about AI in that a little bit, and of course, things like emergencies or virtually any data source can drive a decision on what content you may want to put on the screen. So the more automated overall, in my opinion, the better it is.
Perfect. Let's pivot a little bit away from the content side and let's talk about the technology behind this that's used to trigger content. Jeffrey, I'll start with you. Any pros or cons to the different kinds of technology you can use to trigger this?
There's a lot of different ways. There's a lot of technology out there. I don't think that there's necessarily a black and white, right and wrong response to that. We just look at what's emerging and what is most, what are clients asking for and what gives the most accurate results. So at Navori, we focus a lot on computer vision. Computer vision is the act of analyzing a feed of images so that you can determine information about what's taking place. So think about it in its very simplistic form. If you look at Google Analytics and you're on any type of website, so when you do an online optimization, you look at what's your total traffic to the website, what is your unique visitors, how long are people staying on a certain page, what links are they more likely to click on. But most importantly, what's your conversion? So how do I get them to fill out a web form, or how do I get them to drive to make a purchase and spend more money? And in the physical space, people want the same type of data, but it's lacking. So what computer vision is bringing to different environments is the same exact KPIs and metrics you use to assess your virtual presence. You can now use that to assess your physical presence. So I think that overall, you also have sensors, which can be very important. So sensor-based triggering, it really all depends on the environment where you're putting it, what your objectives are, and exactly what you want the guest experience to look like. And in the end, it's all kind of on topic, driving towards more automation and a smarter system.
Makes sense. Tomer, anything to add to that in terms of technology you've seen out in the field and use cases?
Yeah, we've where Jeff's kind of more focused a little bit on the retail, or explaining on the retail side. We've started getting more into the experience centers, whether it's even at an education campus where they want to kind of orient students a little bit more, and drive content for them that's relevant through sensors as they're walking, or again, experience centers where they have sensors to give different product information, give different guests an experience or experiential type of content, and whether it's a touchscreen table that connects to a big LED wall, or they want to do a history timeline as you're walking across the video wall, it pops up in information. Even in this last year, we added our own, or built our own, temperature scanning system, and then evolved that into face mask detection, into a virtual receptionist, which has to have sensors, webcams to trigger this information. And I think that's kind of part of what I was saying before, the visitor management access control. I think the future is all about keeping that human interaction with reducing some of that physical kind of face-to-face scenarios. And all of that has to have sensors to trigger or be aware of what to trigger from a content or a receptionist or check-in or any of that kind of stuff. So I think Intel is doing a lot with the AI world, and they're kind of building a lot of that stuff with Intel RealSense and all of those other stuff that they've got. There's companies like Quivity that are doing demographic stuff. There's all of these. In reality does a lot of cool things. There you go, Ryan. And so there's a lot of those companies that are kind of specializing in sensors, and we can integrate with that, and we kind of stay in our lane in some of these things. I think that, again, is part of that automation that is driven through basically a hands-off approach, that it sees you and knows what to drive content to you.
Great. Tim, anything to add from a technology standpoint about triggering content? You're muted, Tim, by the way. You're muted.
Sorry, I'm
No
trying
worries.
to play fair. And anyway, there's not much more I can add to. I mean, that was Tomer. Kudos to you, and Jeff. You guys, I'm not that much of a vocal person to add much more to that. I mean, I'm so simple as just the weather does so much, but without these guys here, my weather data is just there. It can't do much. I mean, we have, of course, in our product lineup, we have our self-service portal where users can log in and bring down that data or the visualizations for full screen or zones or what have you. But that kind of veers off topic of what we're doing today. So data that does trigger would be weather, and of course, traffic, and sports scores have been used in the past. And there's not too other many that I can think of in our lineup that can do much more triggering than the localized data. The weather's got so many different elements inside of it that can be your feels like, or we provide icon codes for what the sky looks like or what the precipitation is. So when a client comes on board, we'll provide them with, a template of icon, sunshine, wind, what have you, or they could take and put their own in that they've developed their own creative. But I've seen clients also use those triggers to do other things, some fun stuff. We had a client once that they took pictures of employees that were, holding an umbrella or smiling with, a beach ball if it was sunny. So they did something completely off the wall for employee engagement. It was in-house IR stuff, not IR stuff, HR stuff. But that's all I've got for now, guys. I love listening to the progress. I've been out of the with I'm going to use the word, I guess I can. We won't get demonetized by saying COVID, but COVID really just put us all into such a different world. And to be coming out and people being ready to engage again, that's exciting me completely, because I'm a hands-on kind of guy, and with the technologies that's there, such as what you and Tom are working on as far as this to check if you got a face mask, that's pretty cool. I think maybe I need to get into some of that as well.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the surface, right? Once you could detect a face mask, then you could really start to go further. You could detect vehicles, you could detect license plates, you could really start to get lots of information. And depending on the context where you're installing a digital sign, you can use that. So the question I think that customers need to ask themselves is, in my situation, in my context, what data do I have access to that I can make available to the digital signage? And once you start answering that question, you're going to start to come up with use cases and ways to automate what's going to get put up on the display in order to make it more relevant and lower your cost.
I think that's a perfect kind of transition here as to the why. Tomer, like your opinion, like why should people look at using this kind of content to generate triggers? What are the key benefits?
Well, Jeff actually just triggered me. The license plate scenario is huge. We've been doing like find my car experiences because we kind of specialize in wayfinding for a number of years, and it's just so funny how in airports and shopping malls you literally forget where you parked your car. And so these sensors are being leveraged all over parking garage and everything to find your car based on your license plate. You put in your tag number and you find your plate. So even that sounds rudimentary, but there's so many things that are triggering that information to then provide you a pathway to on a mobile app, on a kiosk, or anything like that. And it's stress relief as well, because I'm like, shoot, where the hell did I just park my car? So even that kind of stuff, there's this like kind of like benefit, this value add that people don't think about, but it's something that is used or needed on a daily basis. And we're all forgetful in some way. So there's a huge benefit that it triggers content, but there's another benefit that it also provides another layer that we don't think about, where you're finding your car, you're locating a store, you're all of these things are based on what or the sensor sees, or what you're clicking, or now touchless touch. As Tim says, he likes to touch things. Now it's touchless touch, so he doesn't have to touch anything anymore. And so I'm excited where where the AI, the computer vision, as Jeff is referencing, is going to learn more to drive more data information that then can trigger more automation. And so I think that we're just kind of at the brink of that, and we're 22 miles. We're always learning and doing more, but it takes this industry and us to kind of understand the nuances to just keep growing and developing. And so, yeah, no, I was just triggered as soon as you said license plate. I just remembered to find my car. Such a relevant thing.
Well, Tomer, let me ask this real quick. Is that application, has it been named already? Is it called Dude, Where's My Car?
Could be.
I like it.
I think the underlying theme as to why, and Tomer did a good job at explaining a really good use case there, is its progress. And if you look at digital signage and how it's evolved, we're able to do so much more with it now because we've gotten better at computing data, storing data, and manipulating data so that it can be made available in a way that it could be leveraged to make decisions.
Yeah.
And on one hand, it's actually just really good use of databases and moving data around or allowing one system to read the data from another system through an API. And it's really that simple. And with that, you could do pretty much anything in any context. It could be choosing how many promos to put on a preview board in a drive-through system based on how many vehicles are in the queue. And you can say, okay, if there's one car going through quickly, I'm going to play this one featured item. If there's 5 cars waiting, I'm going to roll a longer sequence to make sure that everybody can see something that might appeal to them. It could be, there's a lot of different use cases, but all about progress. That would be the why.
Yeah, and I think in the last year, with everyone kind of planning on the reopening plans, also occupancy sensors, right? Like density controls, all of that is kind of the new future, where it also connects to your Office 365 or G Suite or Exchange. And now all of that talks together to let you know what meeting rooms are available and how many seats are available in that room, and to reduce the cluster. And again, if people still want to kind of keep social distancing at a semi-norm, then all of that can still be triggered through these different density grouping controls or occupancy sensors. So again, even sensors from what we were leveraging it to trigger content now also can trigger safety protocols. Also, God forbid there's a shooter, right? There's shooter sensors out there that can go to first responders. All of that is still being leveraged with digital content, because if first responders need to know where that individual is through a visual display of some sort of visual communication. So there's so many of these nuances that are going to revolutionize safety, revolutionize programmatic information altogether. So it never stops. And I think the agile workplace, the emergency information, all of these things are just at the infancy right now.
I agree. And I also think it's really separating into different categories, the different providers that are out there, and making it a little bit more clear what's required in order to achieve automation. And we use the word API, we use the word data integration, and a very simple evolution. We used to take data and show the information on the screen. Now we're taking the data, and we could still show it on the screen, or we could use it to make a decision on what piece of content we want to show on the screen. Mm-hmm. So it's like one step further. And that becomes extremely powerful in virtually every context. It could be in the emergency where we put up an Amber Alert, or God forbid a shooter or something like that, and you read straight off a CAP feed, which is basically an XML feed, the Common Alerting Protocol, and we link that to an image or a video of some kind so that people know that this is happening and they know the actions they need to take to stay within protocol.
Evacuation routes can be, all of that stuff, absolutely.
So we've talked a lot about the content and the sensors and some of the applications. Let's talk a little bit on the CMS side of things. And Jeffrey, I'll start with you. In general, if somebody's interested in this topic and maybe they've already got digital signage, or maybe they're looking at implementing it, what are some of the best practices? What are some of the questions they should be asking a CMS provider to make sure that they can grow into these types of things in the future?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So, first of all, you want to look at how open is the architecture. So if you don't know everything you want on day one, you want to have a system that's going to be able to talk to another system, a third-party system, and receive information or instructions from that system. Pretty much everything that's automation is about one system talking to another through some type of API, usually some type of web service. And not every solution has that type of openness. And if you're restricted just to a user interface, whether that's web-based or some other type of UI, you're going to be quite limited in how you automate content delivery and what type of content you can take. Now, RSS, media RSS, those are simple ways. And I think, in fact, Tim Datacall does an amazing job at giving us beautiful MRSS feeds and things that we can use and throw up on the screen. Where we go further is you want to look at, okay, what other means do I have to ingest the raw data so I can then manipulate that to create logic and decisions? So I would say, number one, data management tools. Number two, data filtering tools. So you can take a large set of data to create more relevant subsets of data. How can you create logic within the platform itself without having to write custom code? So the ability to assign rules against various media that you have access to. And then an API, how can I receive and ingest content from a third party and then get it on the screen without having to do any clicks or movements in the user interface? So those are some of the key things. And if you really want to get creative from there, you may want to look at, okay, how can I also give back information to the other system to validate that in fact I did what I was supposed to do? So there's this bi-directional exchange of information.
Makes sense. So Tim, I know you work with a lot of different CMS companies. Any advice to people that are looking at doing this about what they should be looking for in a CMS provider?
Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and echo Jeff. I mean, if it's just a web-based product that just gives you point, drag, click, and it's doing all the work, you typically won't have that type of customization available. If you get into the more robust systems such as Navori, where you're able to have some preset code that does such a thing, and for sure being able to access APIs. I mean, I don't think I mentioned it, but we do APIs as well. We, full gamut of every which way you want to get the data. But I suggest, really looking at the different providers. Is it something that's just a white label, click and slap a menu on the screen, or is it something that's quite intelligible that can use resources outside of the box and go to third-party providers such as Datacall and bring these elements in to make decisions? We're completely agnostic, of course, so I'm not going to drop any names of anyone, but I do recommend, if you want to get deep into triggering, really look at the platform that you're evaluating and see what those possibilities are. And that's about all I've got to that one.
Makes sense. Tomer, anything to add on the CMS side?
Yeah, I think Tim kind of finished it with the right word I've been trying to pop out: platform. It's all about kind of having this platform to be able to host the different data components, the different design elements, visual filters, and be able to manipulate all types of digital devices for any digital application, right? So you're starting from the app. Everyone now needs an app. The millennials require an app. Gen Z requires an app. So being able to develop an app, but then taking it to a tablet, taking it to a 42 to 55 inch screen or 110 inch screen nowadays, going into desktop solutions for desktop notifications. So now you're reaching that level, and then going into any type of resolution LED. So someone that can touch every single one of those digital devices, now you've got this immersive solution. And I think that is very important for future proofing, because you may want to do something now, and why would you deal with something that's very siloed in that feature set? It's good to think of what can I or need in the future, and finding that platform that can basically grow with your needs or grow with the industry trends of what your needs would be. So that's important to find a CMS solution.
Before I jump into just a couple more questions, I just want to remind everybody in the audience that we're halfway through here. We definitely want to take audience questions, so we'll get to those here in a few minutes. So if we've sparked anything that you want us to expand on further, or topics that you'd like us to dive a little further in, just look for that Q&A box in the Zoom webinar. and throw those questions in, and we'll be getting to those here in just a minute. So, you know, shift gears just a little bit. Let's talk about privacy, because it's always a hot topic. And Tomer, I'll start with you. Are there risks of privacy infringement when you're using this kind of sensors, technology, AI? What are some of the questions people should be asking if they're looking at deploying this to make sure that they're not doing anything out of bounds?
Jeff is going to be way smarter than me on this. I'll let him use the fancy words. I'll just layman's terms it. As long as you're sticking in the ones and zeros, there really isn't any privacy concerns, right? If we're not doing what certain foreign countries do with facial recognition, and all we're doing is detecting your gender or something like that, we're not like infringing on anything, because we don't know who you are. We don't have that personal data, that personal information. It's really just to push specific content if we're doing that type of scenario. If we're not touching, if we're just doing like the CDC questionnaire for temperature scanning solutions, we're not going against HIPAA, because those are just normal generic questions. Someone told me yesterday, if you're asking if someone took the vaccine, now you're infringing on their HIPAA. So there's all of these types of things to consider, from what content you're being displayed and what information you're gathering. And as long as you're sticking in the ones and zeros, then I don't think you're infringing on privacy at all. You're not infringing on the GDPR or any of those kind of stuff as well, because we're not collecting that information. We're not storing it or reselling it, or any of the Facebooks of the world. We're just kind of allowing you to understand real time certain design nuances based on just the ones and zeros.
So is that an important question that somebody should be asking their vendor, if they are storing this and they are selling that information?
Absolutely. I think there's definitely those ad CMS solutions out there that need to store that data in order to sell the ad companies on the CMS. So those kind of CMS solutions, I think you're buying into what you're getting. But I think general ones aren't storing it. There's no need to store it, and there's no need to collect it. So yeah, you definitely asking that question, I think, makes sense. It's a simple question to ask. But from what I know in the industry, most of the CMS solutions that we compete with are not storing or collecting or wanting anything to do with that more personal data.
Right.
Okay. Jeffrey, you want to expand on that?
I think I will, and I think that Tomer didn't give himself nearly enough credit before he answered the question, because he brought up some of the really key points that you have to think about. I have unfortunately had the pleasure of spending hours and hours and hours with different lawyers going through GDPR compliance and trying to understand at what point are you infringing and what is okay and what is not okay. And you come up out when that's all said and done with the fact that the regulation is still evolving. So that's one point to consider. And what you need to absolutely make sure of is that you're not storing any images or video of any kind. So you're not storing anybody's personal information. You're not collecting that. You're not keeping it. It's thrown out. It's gone right away. And you're transforming that into a string of, Tomer used zeros and ones, but it's a string of data. And you can analyze using a form of AI, which is basically deep learning. And within deep learning, you have something called neural networks, which basically emulate the way that the eyes interpret or the way that the brain interprets what the eyes are seeing. And now computers do that. So you can actually watch and you can detect not just shapes and bodies, but you could start to look at actual data points on a body and a face and come up with what we'll call a fingerprint, or an embedding is the actual technical term. And that's a unique identifier for any given object that you want to look at. So you have to have, if you have options on how you manage that embedding and you're not keeping any of that personal data, you are within compliance and should not be technically subject to GDPR. Then there's two other points that come up. So the first one is an analytical purpose for the data. So once you've collected information, it's important to aggregate it before you analyze it. So when you look at data in aggregate, you're not looking at any individual, you're looking at a total encompassment of behavior. And then that gets analyzed. So it's like it's a census. So you keep a large sample size, and the more inputs you have, the more accurate your analysis is going to be. So that would be use case one. I want to analyze data based off of what's happened so I can better understand behavior. Use case two would be, I want to get this information in real time, do something with it, like affect digital signage, and then it goes away. So, simple example of that could be, I'm waiting in line at a bank. I recognize that the lineup is more than 3 minutes and the median age in the line is under 25. So I'm going to put up information about student loans. Once that's done, that information is forgotten. It's not used again and it's not stored. So it's a real-time use that's never kept, therefore not subject to GDPR.
Okay.
Like I said, way fancier than me.
Sorry.
So I know a lot of this conversation we've been, kind of gearing it around cameras and that type of thing. What's your guys' take on Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, beacons, where maybe you're capturing the MAC address of somebody's device? Tomer, opinion on that?
I think Apple is still controlling a lot of that, right? You have to have a full downloadable app. You can't work off of a Wi-Fi app from an Apple perspective. Google, Android doesn't care, right? Because for them, their whole business model is to understand that data and then collect it and add, sell. And my wife works for Google, and she'll say, Google does not collect personal data. It just grouped IDs. So stop saying that to people. So just to be nice to my wife, Google does not collect your personal data, just what you're doing. Okay, but I lost my train of thought on protecting my wife there. And then, and so, geez, where was I going with that? I don't know where I was going with that. Listen, what happens when you get involved with your wife, you forget things. What was the question again, Ryan? Sorry.
We were talking about privacy infringement and the sensors, and we were kind of migrating towards
Bluetooth. Bluetooth. Yes. I think Bluetooth right now for push notifications. There's no reason that should be part of privacy. You're just based on where your current geofencing location is. You're just kind of pushing information. Corporations have been doing that for years. We just did something with Stanford's Medical Children's, and they're doing that for Wi-Fi, wayfinding positioning, right? Just to help the patients, the family members find their way. Corporations are doing RFIDs, NFCs with Active Directory single sign-on, and just for external check-in or room booking and stuff like that. But that's already kind of built in, and there's already kind of permissions based on that are allowing that kind of stuff. And as long as you're consenting by downloading the app, then all you're really doing is just consenting to being pushed certain information, not that your information is being collected. So there is that kind of nuance to consider, is that, again, even if you're consenting, you're not consenting that I know everything about Tim Vance and what he did last night. So
that's a scary thought.
I know, right?
Hey.
It's just to be able to push information.
Tim, anything from your perspective when it comes to privacy and some of the things you worked on?
Yeah, I can put my tinfoil hat on if I wanted to, but I'm just, no, we haven't had to deal with any of that because we're not collecting anything back. I mean, we typically can see basically just an IP or a range of IPs where data is being called from, because by the time it's getting to the use case of the screen, we've just making sure that we're license compliant and that we're not pulling anything else back in. And I'm a freak when it comes to personal data. I mean, if my profile of some social media platform says I live in Iceland, but we all know I'm in Texas. I'm paranoid like that, but who knows?
So, Timely, you mentioned licensing data. One of the questions that came in is just, differences between free data, RSS feeds, and licensed content. What's your opinion? Why should people use licensed content on their displays?
Wow. Yeah, well, that's right up in my wheelhouse. So, number one, if you're just pulling data off the internet from RSS feeds of any news organization, these things are set up for web browsing. And if you look at the TOS, it specifically says not for commercial use. One of the downfalls of that, of course, is they can change the formatting anytime they choose to. And not to mention, it's just waiting for that day for, massive lawsuits to happen. I've spent with the team years building out these licenses and agreements with our providers, and to see some of these people pushing the free RSS sites, it's like, man, you just waiting for trouble. I think I touched a little bit on that on one of the DSF education courses. If somebody wants to go visit that, and talked about it in depth, but it's kind of been one of those things we've been challenged with for years. It's always, the easy way out. But, I've got many clients that have come on board. They said, man, we were doing weather with XYZ for free for so long, and we just lost 600 of our screens. They're all timing out, and errors. Like, well, you kind of get what you pay for. But it's licensed content. It takes work, and that's where companies like Datacall come in, and we manage all that licensing. When you're subscribed to us, you're completely compliant. In fact, as you go into the portal, if someone's using DL Manager, they're actually understanding and agreeing to those terms and services that are pretty clear when they come in. Then, of course, when we do other arrangements with APIs and stuff, we show all that, we expose all of how the licensing works. But that's a task in itself, just managing licensing, because it's just a matter of not how, but when are some of these evil heads going to raise up and just start blasting people that are using what we call scraping off the internet. There was my 2 cents on it.
Perfect. Another question came in that is probably geared more at you, Tomer and Jeffrey, about content. The barriers around producing all this content. If you're using AI and you're doing all these rules, how do you produce all that content and keep a database of it? Any guidance on just feeding the beast? Tomer, I'll start with you. Oh, you're muted.
I want Jeff to answer that first.
Okay.
Oh, that's really kind of you. Thank you. I think it's a really good question. And I think that there is a misconception that you need to have so much content in order to automate or create intelligent playback. You could look at what content you already have, and then you simply start to apply rules to it and conditions. You say this should play when and under this set of circumstances. And you could let the AI run its course, and it's going to make the decisions, and you kind of got a decision engine, and your content is sitting in a kind of repository where it's just picking and choosing what to play based on what's happening, based on that moment in that particular space where your screen is. One way that we're seeing clients really start to optimize that, so if I go a step further, and this goes back to one of the questions that was asked earlier, which is how do we automate and connect with other third-party systems to ingest content? So very often, companies will have a digital asset management system, which manages assets that might need to go to the website. They might need to go to their intranet or SharePoint. It may also go to a mobile app, and also digital signage. So digital signage becomes one output. So a good way to get content is to simply leverage tools you're already using and then channel that content when appropriate using rules to the digital signage so that it's fully automated and you're always got something fresh to show to your audience.
Got it. So a follow-up question that came in is just, how does AI fit into this? How do you train the AI as to what it's supposed to do?
Ooh, that's a good one. Trade secret. No, AI is, in fact, it's all about data. You have to train your models, and I think that's really the secret. That's really the key sauce here, because if you look at the history of how AI evolved, go back even 5 years ago in our industry, and further, when we first started seeing foot traffic analytics, age and gender and people counting, we were using basic machine learning models. And these models were looking at the shape of a body and looking and searching for edges within an object and then making a guess that it must be a person. And with that type of model, you end up with a balloon that could be misconstrued as a person's face, or a wheel that gets counted as a person. So imagine you have a camera in a window and it sees cars going by. You can imagine what could happen to the count. And then, you also have employees running around all day. That can mess up the count. So what's happened is the models have gotten smarter and they look beyond just the edges and the shape. And you can train them using a variety of methods. And if you wanted to learn more about that, you can Google convolutional neural networks. That is the underlying technology that goes into a lot of the AI you see in digital signage and computer vision. And you'll start to understand how you can make those algorithms smarter. And in fact, they get better over time.
I have a real life experience of that 3 years ago in ISC. There was a vendor there, a booth that was promoting their AI built in with their sensors to read emotions to understand what your emotion is to push what ad. So and they were next to our booth that we were at an ISC. So I'd have to pass by them every single time, and every single time it said I was angry. I'm like, I'm not angry. I'm fine. Why do you keep saying I'm angry? It got to the point where I got angry that it kept saying I was angry. And then when I was angry, it said I was sad. I was like, what the hell?
No pleasing it.
No. I had to like show teeth to like, oh, he's
that's and that's the problem with, and this could be debated. This is a whole other subject, but mood detection, when you start getting into emotion, people display emotion differently. So it's very hard, like you just said, to discern what a person is feeling by the way and the angle their lips are curved, for example, or their eyes are perked up or to the right. So you really enter a world where you're more guessing. And I think one of the key takeaways when you think about automated content and AI and how to effectively use it is accuracy. So as soon as we enter a world where the data is no longer accurate, then using it becomes much less effective. That's one of the challenges around mood and other things. It's you start to enter a world of false positives, and that's we've seen that too, Tomer. So that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's definitely growing. And again, now it's 3 years ago, so it's
yeah,
like you say, definitely growing and developing better.
Hopefully, the algorithms are better.
They absolutely are. Every year it changes. Actually, this industry, if you look, it's from 2018 to now, the changing in just compute power and how fast you can analyze and how accurately you do it, and the types of models and the optimizations to those models, it's actually an incredible field of study.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just digital signage. They use it for voice. They use it for they use it everywhere. It's well beyond just automating content for signage.
Perfect. Well, we're getting to the bottom of the hour here, so kind of move to wrap things up. So in closing, I know we covered a lot of ground here. I'd like to just go round robin, let each of you kind of share your closing thoughts, insights. What are the key takeaways that you'd like the audience to walk away with from this conversation? So Tim, I'll start with you. Closing thoughts?
One of the takeaways I'd like to see the audience, couple things. One, it's still fresh in my brain is, licensed content for sure. If you're going to utilize data to trigger things, make sure you're getting proper data that's licensed. Privacy, I'm going to go home today thinking more about that as well. And I think everyone else is going to come back and, some of the concerns I've had in my own paranoid self, after what Tomer mentioned is it's ones and zeros. So, maybe we should all, think more about what are we giving up in as far as data collection and digital signage. I'm glad you guys have made this more clear, because I'm sure there were some concerns out there, and I'm sure there'll be more about it. But, I'm happy to have been here today to have these conversations and be part of this. It's always great to be surrounded by some geniuses. I've always been told that, you surround yourself with smart people, it just makes you smarter, right?
Perfect. Tomer, closing thoughts from you?
First, that I need to have more conversations with Jeff. Very, very interesting stuff. No, it was very enlightening, even for me, to kind of hear different perspectives. But I'm with that, I'm more excited about the industry and where we're taking it. And I think for any individual that was here, we had a little over 65 people or so on this. Hopefully they were able to kind of take the understanding that there is this automation, there is this real-time solutions out there that will benefit any organization for any type of application need that they may have, and that they don't have to worry about data collection, that they don't have to worry that there's too much work, manual work that they have to do, that connecting the right API, connecting the right design, and working with the right CMS could be leveraged for years and years to come to benefit and add value to the organization, to the visitors, to the staff, and reduce the stress and empower the solution in general. I think that there's a lot more to learn, and I think that more of these kind of workshops are going to benefit everyone. But yeah, it's all about these types of peers that are going to push the needle forward. So even me, I'm excited to hear even what Jeff was saying in general. So yeah, good stuff.
Good. Last but not least, Jeff, closing thoughts, takeaways?
Sure. You know, kind of echoing Tim and Tomer, you know, we're an exciting time in signage and analytics. You know, we're pushing new boundaries. We're getting more intelligent and automated systems. And I think that, you know, there's 60 people listening, so I'm sure you all come from a variety of backgrounds. But ultimately, if you're looking for a solution, you know, count on and rest assured that the right provider will take all this sophisticated or, you know, some of the more complex subjects that we may have bridged today, and they'll make it really easy. So when you actually get into it, there's not much for you to do. That's our job. Our job is to make everything we just said actually simple and automated, where you just click a few buttons and set it and forget it. And I think that's what's really going to drive and make this something that can be implemented and scaled, and is already. So
perfect. And I know that Lauren put all of our LinkedIn profiles in the chat windows. So if any of you guys want to connect with us, ask further questions, I think I speak for all of us. We're always looking for more friends, so feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn and continue the conversation there. So with that, Lauren, did you have any closing things you wanted to throw in before we wrap things up?
I do. Thank you for sharing. I would like to thank each of you for your time today and contributing to this conversation. I think this was just such a wonderful, insightful discussion, and I surely hope that our attendees feel the same. Want to give a shout out to Digital Signage Certification Week coming up at the end of June. They are going to be having 3 days of education via webinar, and you can earn 8 RU credits for this. So we want to give a shout out to the DSF, DSEG, and of course AVIXA for partnering and making this happen. Also, please save the date for our next webinar, July 20th, in the Design Power Hour series. We're going to be talking about multi-display and video wall content creation. To register, please go to avixa.org/events. And again, thank you all, and thank you to DSF for making this possible for this series. Tim, Tomer, Jeffrey, and of course Ryan, thank you all for your time, and we look forward to having a discussion with you guys later on.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Feed the beast.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.